Hello, welcome to another Rant Rave review. During Get Caught Reading Month, I will be reviewing true crime. This one is not quite a rant or a rave. It's actually in between. It's mostly rave though. And I'm also showing off more swag, true crime swag. I bought this at Party City 2 years ago. It's an evidence ticket bag for carrying books and stuff. I use it to carry my stuff for writing my mysteries. Yay! Alright, anyway, that's out of the way. So I'm going to review two books about female killers. One is called Lady Killers by Tori Telfer, Deadly Women Throughout History. And then the other one is called Female Serial Killers, How and Why Women Become Monsters by Peter Vronsky. So, they're very different, but they're also very similar. So, Lady Killers is the one by Tori Telfer. It examines, basically each chapter is like an examination of a killer. So there's like Elizabeth Bathory, Kate Bender, who was part of the Bloody Benders of Kansas, this whole family that would murder men for their money. I think there's one or two poisoners. There's this Russian aristocratic lady who would murder her serfs. And there's one woman from Alexandria who was basically a street, she went between being a prostitute and a madam and a murderer and just a delightful person. So anyway, this one's really interesting. I liked it because she really goes into detail about how these women murdered. And it's interesting because people, it's just a fact that female serial killers don't tend to be as torturous as male killers. They don't usually aren't into the whole lust, murder, sex, crime stuff unless they're partnered with a male killer, usually. That's pretty much the rule. However, Tori Telfer describes what happens when you poison someone with arsenic. And it's horrible. Horrible. And some of these women would just poison them and just watch these people die. And they're what are you gonna do? Keep feeding them poison. There was one woman who, coaxed this wealthy man to come with her across the country. And then when he's, dying of arsenic poisoning, she puts him up in this, rat hole hotel and then goes to the fancy hotel herself. And then when his room got so disgusting because, your body basically, completely, breaks all your organs or just, mush. Once you get arsenic poisoning, and the hotel was basically you need to come get this guy. She's like, oh, I barely know him. Yeah, so horrible. So even though we tend to think of female serial killers as poisoners and not torturers, you're kind of torturing people when you poison them. And I there was one chapter where she said, I forget what she said, but basically you have to be an emotionless person to poison. You just don't care. It's yep. And that's the thing is, male serial killers tend to do their weird torture stuff because they get off on it. Female serial killers are just I need money, so I'm fine, torturing this person to death. It's really creepy. But that was very fascinating. However, this is why it's not a rave. I remember reading partway into it and thinking, gosh, this would be, way better if this, didn't sound like it was written by somebody with a gender studies major. Because there's several... She doesn't quite excuse the murders, but she almost does. The woman in Alexandria, and there was some other woman in some African country, she almost makes it sound yeah, good for them. I mean, she doesn't really, but she almost does. Whereas I feel if it was, talking about a man doing the same things or a European woman doing the same things, she would be more, not okay with it. And then there was this one entire village in Hungary where, I don't even know, dozens of women poisoned their husbands. It was this huge cabal. And she is almost, again, she's while describing the economic and cultural structures that led to that poisoning, which is basically World War I, wiping out any kind of stability and also tons of poverty and also blah, blah, blah. The author almost sounds like she's excusing them, hideously murdering, their husbands and kids. And I'm not a fan. There's no excuse for that. I'm sorry. Like, I don't care. And again, it's because there's plenty of women who live in, like, dire situations who didn't murder their husbands and kids. So, like, I don't have much sympathy for murderers. I do to a point. There's always, like, that time where you're like Charles Manson, okay? If you know about Charles Manson's childhood, his mother, like, literally didn't love him. Like, she literally didn't even give him a name. He was named No Name, whatever his actual, I don't know if his name was Manson or if he took on that name. But anyway, and then he, like, bounced back and forth between, like, boys' homes, and it was really sad, and he, like, started stealing cars, and I'm like, okay, I feel for the guy. And then he started prostituting his girlfriends, and I'm like, I no longer feel sorry for him. Like, there's a certain point where I can feel sorry for you, and then you cross a line, and I'm like, no. If you poison your children, I do not feel sorry for you. If you poison non-abusive husbands, I do not feel sorry for you. I'm just like, nope, sorry. I don't care what dire straits you have. Like, cool motive, still murder, I think is how it goes. Yeah. So I was, like, sad. I was like, I wish there was a better book that wasn't written by somebody with a women's studies major. And along comes Female Serial Killers by Peter Vronsky. So, which was kind of an answer to my call. So he takes a much more, I don't know, like, very scientific approach. Like, he starts off the entire book describing, like, the statistics of, like, male versus female serial killers and all the different types of serial killers and what's the definition of a serial killer versus any other kind of killer. And very scientific. And then he presents a bunch of little case studies. Like, he spends more time on some than others, but just little individual case studies of different women. The one flaw in his book, and why it's not a rave, is it wasn't as exciting as Tori Telfer's. Tori Telfer was just sort of like, I'm going to choose a bunch of random cases, like, woo! Whereas Vronsky, like, basically started with ancient Rome and then, like, went forward through history. And it was okay, but it could have been a little spicier. I don't know. But it was okay. There was a lot of times where it was, like, kind of the same thing. I was like, you don't really need to go into, like, almost the same crime. You don't have to. Yeah. But I did like it. I did like how he actually tackled, so Tori Telfer, I'm sorry, poor woman's name, Telfer. She did tackle, like, Elizabeth Bathory and that one Russian woman, like, aristocratic type serial murderers. And it's interesting too because of, like talking about, like, you know, oh, like, and she talks about the woman who murdered her serfs and, like, she just thought that she could because that was the culture. And I was like, I feel like it's not so much the culture as, like, this person happened to have been born a sociopath or something happened to them when they were a child and became a sociopath and they just happened to be in power. So it's, like, not good for anybody who happens to live under them. Same with Giles de Reis. Like, he's just a psychopath and he would probably just be one of your random Ted Bundy types or, like, BTK, except that he happened to have a giant castle where he could, like, murder tons of people. So, you know, circumstances. Anyway, getting back to the books, Vronsky, so he talks about, like, Roman empresses who, like, friggin', what's her name? Agrippina? Holy moly, so much incest. Anyway, and other Roman, like, ladies who would just like, oh, I want to murder this guy because I want his power or his garden or whatever, you know, I'm just going to kill people. Why not? So he talks about that. He talks about a lot of the, you know, women who would poison relatives for various things, angels of death, which are, like, nurses who, like, murder their patients for whatever reason. Some of which were actually, like, sexually motivated, which is creepy. What is her name? Something Toppin. Jane Toppin, maybe? Look that up. She's probably a serial killer. And then, like, Munchausen syndrome by proxy, which is where a person murders people under their care, or not murders, but, like, poisons or injures someone under their care in order to make it seem like they're a victim, and then that they're, like, a really good caregiver so that they can get attention. And it often ends with death because, you know, when you poison somebody enough, they die. And then it's really interesting. He talks about sex killers. He talks about, like, this phenomenon of, like, again, women don't usually tend to murder, like, with a weird sexual torture stuff unless they're with a guy. I skipped those chapters. I was like, no thanks. I don't need to know about this. Ew, gross. but I'm sure they're fascinating. He does discuss Aileen, I do not know her name. She was like if you ever heard of the movie Monster, it won an Academy Award. She was this serial killer who would like hitchhike along highways. She was a prostitute. She'd hitchhike along highways and like murder men. And she's one of those people who I legit like feel sorry for her up until a point. Like she had a horrible life and a horrible upbringing. And I'm like, okay, I feel sorry for you. I feel sorry for you up until you start murdering innocent men and claiming they were trying to rape you. Like, it's unknown if her first victim actually did try to rape her and she killed him. And you're like, what are you going to do? But then everyone after that, you're like, no, I don't think that's likely, no. But she just claimed that it was, and you're like, I no longer feel sorry for you. So it's like that. It's one of those things. But he discusses that, and then he also talks about whether or not you should consider people in Nazi death camps serial killers. He says, yeah, they were, because you're not a soldier killing people on a battlefield. Like you're like taking innocent people and murdering them. And he discusses, it's interesting. He talks about like, you know, the myths and the facts of various people whose names I don't remember. But it's very interesting. He also talks about the Manson cult, of course, because, so yeah, he covers a lot of ground, more of a timeline, whereas Tori Telfer is all over the place. They're both good books. However, the reason I think Vronsky's is better is because he brings up when certain radical feminists are like, oh, you can't blame Aileen, whatever her name is, because, like, she clearly was always, every single time she murdered somebody in a 1 year span, all, like, 9 of her victims clearly all tried to rape her. And it's like, that's, like, statistically unlikely, but okay. Or there was some other, oh my gosh, what is her name? The bitch of Buchenwald? I don't know what her name was, but there's actually feminists who try to defend her, not being like, oh, like certain charges of her were probably like not true because there's certain ones weren't true, like it was a miscommunication of who was doing what atrocity. But they actually try to defend her being like, oh, like this was just male inmates like against her because she had power and that wasn't typical of a woman. And it's like, okay, I mean, way to just throw Holocaust survivors under the bus, but you do you, feminists. You do you. And it's very interesting. So usually Vronsky is super scientific in his like tone of voice, just super scientific, just the facts, man, just the facts, except for 2 times in the book. One of them is when he's talking about the radical feminists defending like these serial killer ladies, and you can just hear the venom like dripping out of him. He's just like, this is not, like, no. Like, tell that to the victims. Like, yeah, no. Which I heartily agree with. Again, as a woman, I can't stand, I actually think it's infantilizing to act like women can't be serial killers or can't feel the same amount of, like, rage or greed or, like, murderous, like, bloodlust as men can. It's like apparently women are too pure and holy to, like, be evil. And I don't get how anyone who thinks that women are equal to men can, like, think that. I'm like, no, like, women can be horrible people as well. Just in different ways, which you should read the books and see both of them discuss that. The other time that he breaks character or breaks his scientific thing is when he's talking about Charles Manson, and he totally, like, goes into this weird, like, very, like, 60s beatniky kind of thing, and I kind of dig it. But that's just because I like the 1960s, sort of. More on that later. Anywho, this is kind of a rave, not much of a rant, but they're both good books. I highly recommend both of them. Depending on your own take, maybe you would prefer the more, like, feminist lens versus the other lens, but I think they're both good. They both hit different people, and then the people that they do talk, like, they both talk about Elizabeth Bathory, and they both kind of take different takes on it. Like, the feminist lady, of all people, is like, nah, she totally did these things, like, 100%, like, except for the bathing in blood, that's a myth, but everything else she totally did, and there's no reason to think that her trial was trumped up. And then Vronsky is like, nah, maybe her trial was trumped up, and maybe she, like, murdered people, but not, like, horrible torture and blah. It's very interesting. Read it, recommend it. True crime, lady serial killers, you might learn a thing. People always say there's no such a thing as a lady serial killer, but they blatant lie. There are plenty of them. So see you next time for more true crime in the Get Caught Reading month. Bye-bye.